We start with breaking news. The Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's future is up in the air. A source telling CNN he expects to be fired, but not yet. The White House saying moments ago that President Trump will meet with Rosenstein on Thursday when the president returns to Washington. This comes just days after a truly stunning report saying Rosenstein actually suggested secretly recording President Trump after he fired James Comey back in 2017 and discussed using the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to oust him. Both claims Rosenstein denies. Let's get straight to our Justice correspondent, Evan Perez, who's working the story for us. So what's the very latest, Evan? What are you learning?
The very latest is, Wolf, that Rod Rosenstein is on his way back to the Justice Department. He has just now left the White House, where he met with the Chief of Staff, John Kelly. The question is, how much longer is he going to stay in that job? For now, at least, he is still the Deputy Attorney General. He has a meeting scheduled now, according to the White House, with the President on Thursday, where they will discuss some of the comments that you just mentioned, these reports that emerged on Friday about comments he made last year, just weeks into his tenure, and whether or not he'll be able to stay in this job. Look, Wolf, it's been clear that Rod Rosenstein expected this day to come. He certainly did not expect it to be today. He expected that certainly those comments, when they were reported on Friday, and he issued a set of denials, both denials that he issued on Friday. He thought, at least over the weekend, that those denials were going to be enough. But it appears that he went into this meeting at the White House where he met with John Kelly, and as a result of that meeting, now he's expecting to meet the president when he comes back from the United Nations later this week. So now we will wait to see whether or not Rod Rosenstein will survive that meeting on Thursday. Keep in mind, obviously, Rod Rosenstein's position as the Deputy Attorney General. He is the top official at the Justice Department overseeing the Robert Mueller investigation, and that's the reason why there's a lot of nervousness, there's a lot of attention as to whether he stays or goes. At this point, right now, he is still the Deputy Attorney General. He's, I believe, just a few minutes away from entering the Justice Department, returning to his job. He attended a meeting at the White House. At the end of his meeting with John Kelly, he actually sat for another meeting, according to officials who were briefed on that meeting. So it appears that a lot of the conjecture and a lot of the confusion this morning will not be settled, at least until Thursday, when the president gets back to Washington from the United Nations. Wolf.
All right, Evan, thank you. Evan Perez with the very latest. So is Rosenstein, is he about to get fired? Is he about to resign? Lots of questions surrounding the fate of Rosenstein now that he has met with the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. In an interview on Geraldo Rivera's radio show, President Trump would not say whether or not he planned to fire Rosenstein.
I think it's a very sad story, and people are obviously, we are looking into it, but it's a very sad state of affairs when something like that can happen. I don't want to comment on it until I get all the facts. I haven't gotten all the facts, but certainly it's being looked at in terms of what took place, if anything took place.
All right, let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. He's outside Trump Tower in New York City, where the president is, at least for a few days this week. Jim, what are you hearing from White House officials?
Well, Wolf, we can tell you that Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, finally, after all of this reporting going back and forth as to what would happen to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, she has put out a statement saying that for now, Rod Rosenstein has not been fired. He has not resigned. He is going to meet with the president on Thursday. And, Wolf, we can put this up on screen. It's very cautiously worded. We should note, but this is what it says. It says, at the request of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, he and President Trump had an extended conversation to discuss the recent news stories. Because the president is at the United Nations General Assembly and has a full schedule with leaders from around the world, they will meet on Thursday when the president returns to Washington, D.C. Of course, Wolf, we should point out this meeting with Rod Rosenstein and the president on Thursday is going to happen on the same day as this very high-profile, very high-stakes hearing that is supposed to take place up on the Senate Judiciary Committee, featuring the president's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and his accuser Christine Blasey Ford. So, Wolf, obviously Thursday is going to be sort of a double Super Bowl day when it comes to news down in Washington. But for now, it seems, Wolf, and I should point out, just before this statement came out from the White House press secretary, I had heard from a very good source close to this process who said that Rod Rosenstein was at the White House earlier this morning morning, but that he was there for a previously scheduled meeting. And in addition to that, that he was still on the job. And so the question, Wolf, is whether or not perhaps he was heading over to the White House thinking, because of these discussions that were taking place over the weekend about his fate, that perhaps he thought going into these meetings over at the White House this morning that he was going to lose his job. But at the end of the day, that did not happen. A couple of other notes we should point out, Wolf. You mentioned the 25th Amendment, talk of the 25th Amendment that apparently Rod Rosenstein was engaged in. That did come up earlier this morning. I was at a press conference featuring the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, the National Security Advisor John Bolton, and I asked Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo whether or not in the early days of the administration, during any time in the administration, were they ever aware of any conversations involving the 25th Amendment. And both high-level cabinet officials, top-level officials in the administration said not only had they never heard of these types of conversations going on, but they felt that those conversations, if they had ever taken place, that the notion that they would take place were absurd and ridiculous. And so even if Rod Rosenstein at one point last year thought it would be a good idea to invoke the 25th Amendment, at least when you take it from Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo, they would never have been interested, as far as what they told us earlier this morning, Wolf, in being a part of any kind of scheme to invoke the 25th Amendment and have the president removed from office, Wolf.
Lots of uncertainty right now. Jim Acosta, New York, with the president. Thank you very much. Obviously, a great deal to discuss. Let's bring in former National Security and Department of Justice Prosecutor Joseph Marino, CNN legal analyst Laura Coates, our chief political correspondent Dana Bash, and our chief political analyst Gloria Borger. So Rosenstein's fate very much up in the air right now.
Well, Wolf, I don't think this is a marriage that can be saved. I mean, I think what you have is a Band-Aid right now until the president gets back from New York City with all of his meetings with foreign leaders at the United Nations General Assembly. And I think that they had an extended conversation. The president has no love for Rod Rosenstein. I think it would be Rosenstein's preference from all of our reporting to resign rather than be fired. You can imagine that. But I don't think there's any way to kind of save this relationship at this particular point. So I think they're just, they're just putting it off until the president is back in town, and Rosenstein will continue doing his job for, 3 or 4 more days.
How do you see it, Dana?
Look, I mean, I have been speaking to sources inside the Republican Party who are engaged in this with the White House, who say, very opposite things, which I think speaks to why we are where we are with this massive confusion. One source I spoke to said it would be a very big mistake for the president to fire Rod Rosenstein, had conversations with the White House to that effect, and had no indication that there was anything that was different about it, at least in the near future. And then on the flip side, another Republican source reminded me about the House in particular, about the fact that they absolutely despise Rod Rosenstein. Remember, they had tried to push articles of impeachment against Rosenstein. And so the plan,
very conservative Freedom Caucus activists.
Right, exactly. And so there is a move, and maybe even if he stays in, it could happen, to call Rosenstein up to the Hill, to get him to answer questions under oath about whether he said in a serious manner that he wanted to record the president and or that he, discussed invoking the 25th Amendment. So that is the dynamic, the sort of the backdrop that all of this is up against, and it is really important to know. And those are the things that the president is hearing, which is why, frankly, he wasn't gone right away.
Right, exactly.
When the story came out on Friday, even though the president has there's no love lost there. He actually understands all of those dynamics, not to mention the public pressure from Republicans on another news channel.
Right, and can I mention one more thing, which is that there is some sense among conservatives that the president could be set up on this.
Right.
And that perhaps the New York Times story on Friday came from memos of Andrew McCabe, whom the president does not trust, and whom Jeff Sessions fired. And so it's kind of a complicated reality show right now. The president not liking him, wanting to fire him, but not wanting to fire him. I can't imagine that Rosenstein doesn't want to resign. It would seem to me he would.
And that's what our reporting shows.
Right.
Also, can we just underscore the fact that Rosenstein went to the White House this morning and ended up participating in a previously scheduled principals meeting, meaning he was sitting at the table with other senior administration officials talking about whatever policy issues were on the agenda while all of this is swirling.
That's a good straight face.
Only in the Trump administration.
What would be the impact, Joseph, on the Mueller investigation if Rosenstein is fired as opposed to resigning? Because there's a difference. The president has a greater ability to put somebody in charge of the Mueller investigation if Rosenstein resigns as opposed to being fired.
That's right. There is an idiosyncrasy in the Department of Justice regulations that makes a distinction between whether Rosenstein is fired or resigns voluntarily. Most likely, the name Noel Francisco will become a household name if any of this happens, because most likely the Solicitor General will become the person, for better or for worse, who oversees the Mueller investigation. He is conservative. He is a longtime D.C. fixture. He's very well known. He's well respected, but he is ideologically aligned. So now, if that changes, there could be, the alternate is an acting deputy attorney general, basically someone who is Senate confirmed in another position within DOJ who could be implemented into that spot by the president. So it remains to be seen how that falls out. I would just add, though, a lot of the confidence that we've seen in the public support of the Mueller investigation is because of two people, Bob Mueller and Rod Rosenstein. If either one of them go for whatever reason, I think you will see a crumbling of support in the investigation. And to my perspective, process is important, and you want that public support.
What about that?
You know, you absolutely do, and you're right. And the idea here is it's not really new news that Rod Rosenstein has been vulnerable. He's been vulnerable his entire tenure with the DOJ under this particular position. He came in, he was already looked at as maybe a potential witness in the obstruction aspect of an investigation because of his own drafting of a memorandum about why James Comey usurped the authority of AG Loretta Lynch. He was already vulnerable there. He's already somebody who, through multiple litigation disputes from people who Mueller has tried to seek and get before the grand jury, has said, look, Robert Mueller doesn't have any checked power here. You have somebody who, and Rod Rosenstein, lets him do whatever he'd like to do. There's no oversight function. Vulnerable there as well. And now you have this latest thing where you essentially put the President of the United States in a conundrum. Either he has to go ahead and relish in the notion that he could actually have an out to fire somebody he doesn't want in the position, or he has to admit that Andrew McCabe, the former acting FBI director for a short stint, who wrote the contemporaneous written memo, is not a liar when it comes to a memo, and the New York Times is suddenly authoritative and credible. So the president has a very, very key conundrum here, but the public perception is the most key here. It doesn't evade a lot of people or elude a lot of people to know that Rudy Giuliani, Jay Sekulow has said that September they wanted the investigation to be over. And now you have September, the end of the month, suddenly maybe an entree into that very thing happening. Coincidence? I think not.
And as you know, Gloria, a lot of Republican leaders were urging the White House to hold off on any purge over at the Justice Department, at least until after the Kavanaugh confirmation takes place.
Right. I mean, they didn't, you know, when we were hearing this late Friday, which was, they were saying to him, you know, slow down, because we really, you know, we really want to have one problem at a time, and we need to get through Kavanaugh, and we don't want to take the velocity of pushing Kavanaugh through anything away from that, and you know, we'll let this settle until it's over. So obviously that didn't happen, and who inspired that, you know, is probably the Deputy Attorney General himself, because Rod Rosenstein wasn't getting political advice about the timing of when he should leave. I mean, I think he, you know, they were about to call him up to the Hill. He's in a difficult situation, and again, his relationship with the president, while people say it's gotten better, it reached a low after Michael Cohen's office was raided, and the president was really upset about the fact that the Deputy Attorney General would have approved that, because that kind of a thing would have had to go through him. So it's been a relationship that from the get-go has been a bit
very quickly
different.
down.
And remember, there has been a bipartisan call for some time to pass legislation protecting Robert Mueller, protecting the investigation. It is hard to see the Republican leadership, who's reluctant before, changing their tune on that now, 6 weeks before Election Day, when everybody is focused on one key thing that independent voters who will make or break this election are worried about, and that is chaos in Washington. Today didn't help, and certainly a fight between the Republican leadership and the Republican president on legislation on Mueller won't help either.